We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 84, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
This week, we're going to talk about when to step away.
Otherwise known as what happens when someone backs out of a deal, when your buyer backs out. And we've experienced this in 1 week. We actually experienced this from both sides. We had a buyer back out of a contract we had in place on a property we were selling, and we had to back out of a contract, or we chose to. We didn't have to. We chose to back out of a property. So we're kind of going to talk about how we came to that decision, what factors were at play, and how we handled that from both sides of having a contract fall apart when the buyer backed out.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think was a great lesson is trying to remove emotion from this, because in the end, you got to rely on your business decisions and what's best for the business.
Yeah, it's funny because we'll just talk about the first instance was we had a property sold to another investor who we're friends with, and he just decided not to follow through. And it was kind of interesting how that played out, because technically we had a contract, a signed purchase agreement, and the contingency or due diligence period had expired. So technically, if you wanted to get technical, we could have pursued things more robustly, legally, and tried to hold his feet to the fire. And we had to kind of make a decision, even though we didn't really enjoy having someone back out, obviously on a purchase agreement, on a signed purchase agreement. What are your options there? How can you handle that? And we try to always take the high road when it's possible, and try to remove the emotion, like you said, pull the emotion out of it, and just look at it. Okay, well, if this falls apart, what do we do from here? Should we find another buyer? Do we hang on to the property? Luckily, if you purchase the property at a good price in the beginning, you have more options available to you, so you're not a motivated seller, which we technically weren't motivated sellers, so we just chose to hang on to the property.
Yeah, and it's important to note that conflict of any kind is rarely the best avenue. Any kind of tarnish to the reputation, or if the conflict got heated, it rarely is going to result in a better situation. So it's sometimes the best decision is just to walk away.
Right, or just release someone. And yeah, I mean, imagine, okay, we're going to hold your feet to the fire. We're going to force you to perform on this purchase agreement. I can't imagine that would end well. For one, the relationship between you and this other party is probably not going to survive that. And, are you even going to get the result you want? You might, in short term, you might possibly get the results you want, but long term is going to damage that relationship, your reputation with them, and you may not even be successful either. We just try to avoid legal avenues whenever possible. It's usually not a win-win for anyone.
So I think what was a little bit more telling is probably how it was communicated. In the end, we would typically want some sort of phone call so we can chat and talk through things on why the deal would not work out. And sometimes it's just not going to be a good fit, and we're not gonna force an opportunity on people. But a quick email or text probably isn't the best way to deliver that news.
Yeah, and we'll kind of contrast how both these situations were handled, and hopefully that'll enlighten people on a better way to go about that. But being on the receiving end of an email stating that the contract was not going to happen wasn't probably the best way to handle that. At least that was our perspective from being on the receiving end of that. So let's move on.
So then on the other side, we had to finally back out of an opportunity that we put a house under contract, and it was going to end up requiring a lot more work than we had planned.
Yeah, so we discovered some major issues with this house, and we had put some earnest money down. So, and we knew that that was at risk because we had our period of checking the house out, our due diligence period had expired, and so there's no recourse on recovering that earnest money. And again, we just removed emotion from it, and we realized that with these additional repairs, we were going to be better off just sacrificing the earnest money rather than taking on this project at this particular time. And you kind of have to look at your situation, look at what you have in the pipeline, how many projects you have going on at a time, and decide whether you have the ability and bandwidth to handle and the cash and everything else needed to finish these extra repairs, and whether it's something you could pull off. And even if you do, are you going to be able to make a profitable exit from the property? And in this case, we weren't comfortable thinking that we could profitably exit, so we were not happy to sacrifice the $1,000 earnest money, but it was the best option. So let's talk about how the kind of the emotions and stuff that goes into that. For me, it was tough because when we, sign a deal, I don't like to even be thought of as a team or people that would back out of a deal. So that was tough to decide, even when we financially decided it was the best option, to actually, make that decision and get there mentally.
Yeah, and if we were talking to somebody or dealing with a person directly, I think we might have had a different result. I know it's a very hard conversation to have, but there is still an opportunity if you're dealing with the seller directly, being frankly transparent and honest with them and tell them the situation. But in this case, we're talking. This was on the MLS. It was a HUD house, so we're dealing with a government agency. And so there's really not an opportunity there other than tarnishing the reputation with some of the realtors in town. Because
even though it's a HUD house, there is still a local realtor listing that. So we don't want that realtor thinking that this is our typical activity. This is something that we would normally do back out of a deal. We don't want to get that reputation that stink on you of being a team that does that. So that was my concern. But once we decided that we were going to not follow through on the contract and lose the earnest money and cancel the deal, basically as soon as we decided that, we said, well, the best way to do it is call him up. And also, the agent that wrote the offer for us, he was going to lose money too. I mean, we're directly taking money out of his pocket too, in form of commissions that he wasn't going to earn if the deal fell apart. So, that's not anything we want to have happen either. So you have to consider all those factors. And, when it came down to it, we just called him up and we were, as soon as we made a decision, we were just straight right to him and just told him straight up what was happening.
Yeah, and I think that is one of those things that we have to keep in mind. When you make these type of decisions, you are impacting everybody down the line. It's not just the buyer. It's not just the seller. You got the buying agent, the selling agent, title companies, everybody involved. You're impacting a lot of people. And I know this is kind of goes against a lot of thoughts, because I know that there's a lot of real estate gurus out there that will pitch the concept of getting the property under contract by all means, and then using that period as a negotiation period. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it has been a little harder for us to pull that type of trigger.
Yeah, and sometimes, it doesn't work out, and unfortunately you have to back away. And I think it's important to try to just do that in the most way that's filled with the most integrity possible and the most transparency possible. And I think people respect that, and they, it's not going to damage your reputation long term, unless it turns into a pattern, right? I mean, obviously your actions speak louder than your words. So if you continue to back out of deals, they're going to start not trusting when you bring offers, right? So we don't want to be known as that. So it was luckily a very rare occasion. I think the first time we've ever actually backed out of once a signed deal was in place, first time we've ever actually canceled something. So it was very rare, and hopefully it doesn't happen in the future too. But we hopefully did it in the right way that maintains our integrity with all the parties involved.
So with that, how many offers did you submit today?
A few.
A few.
3 or 4.
3 or 4. So either way, it's one of those things that we have to, just a reminder that, not every deal is going to work out. And we know that. And again, we try to keep our emotion and pride out of it. We have to make the proper decision, not only for our business, but we have to remember that our business feeds our families, and we have to make those decisions. And sometimes the best decision is to walk away, and we can't blame the people that we're working with making those decisions for themselves as well. We don't know those situations either. So in the end, make the right decision.
Handle it the best way you can, the way you'd want to be treated on the other end of the deal. That's kind of how we think about it. Boy, yeah, this episode's kind of a downer, huh?
Well, sometimes you have to deal with the negative.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the the dark underbelly sides of real estate. Is sometimes contracts fall apart, deals fall apart. So we're just trying to face that head on and deal with it as transparently as possible, and try to maintain integrity throughout. And hopefully, we've done that from both sides of having to step away from deals, and it's not all sunshine and rainbows out there, right?
Yep. And if you actually have any thoughts, feedback, or just have some questions that you'd like us to do a deep dive on the show, send us an email at info@reiRookies.com.
Hit us up on Facebook and Twitter at REI Rookies. Head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other rookie investors out there find the show.
And remember, get off the bench
and get into the game. We'll see you next time.